The story begins quietly, almost normally. The main character had simply fallen asleep after work while enjoying his favorite game, along with his favorite drink. It was nothing special, just another night, just another escape. But when he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in his room. He had awakened inside the very game world he loved so much. There was no long explanation, no gentle introduction. The story immediately plunged into chaos. A battlefield stretched across a cliffside in the demon realm. A female voice shouted a warning, telling someone named Kadim to be careful because even stronger demons were approaching. But Kadim did not hesitate. Kadim was a towering, burly man, a behemoth among humans. Without waiting for orders, he charged straight toward the incoming demons, gripping a massive double-bladed axe. With overwhelming force, he tore through them, cleaving multiple demons apart in a single swing. Limbs flew, bodies split, and blood soaked the ground. His assault was so brutal that even the demons began to hesitate. When the dust settled, Kadim stood alone at the center of the battlefield, surrounded by shredded demon corpses. The ground beneath him was painted red. Steam rose from his body, the result of the sheer energy he had unleashed. He knew this was normal for the demon realm. Encountering high-level demons right from the start was expected. Still, the path to the archdemon was proving far harsher than anticipated. And he also knew something else. After causing such chaos, someone was definitely going to scold him. As if on cue, multiple fireballs streaked toward him and detonated just short of his position. A shrill, furious female voice followed immediately after. The source was a fiery, red-haired woman, Melissa, angry that Kadim had once again rushed ahead on his own, ignoring her warnings. Before the argument could escalate, another man stepped in. Gale, wielding his sword, intercepted the remaining demons and urged Melissa to save the scolding for later. The priority was clearing the battlefield. Even as Gale fought, Melissa grew increasingly irritated, not just at Kadim, but at Gale's overly heroic behavior. Nearby stood a white-haired woman who had earlier called upon Atala, asking the goddess's fighting spirit to be with them. Her name was Cyril. She was worried that Kadim was pushing himself too hard, risking his life for the sake of the team. Despite her concern, Cyril was anything but weak. Another member of the party, Gordon, observed the situation calmly. He believed Kadim had his reasons and felt Cyril was worrying too much. For now, dealing with the monsters came first. The discussion could wait. With that unspoken agreement, all 4 members of the team resumed fighting. They were a 4-person party, led by Kadim himself. He was the vanguard of a hero's party assembled to defeat the archdemon, a chosen warrior of Atala, the goddess of struggle and wilderness. But behind that title was a different truth. Kadim had once been an ordinary modern human. He had never lived a violent life. He had never even killed an animal. Yet now he had been thrust into a world this cruel, this chaotic, forced to survive inside a game that felt far too real. Though some might have enjoyed adventuring with these characters, for someone like him, the reality was overwhelming. As the demons kept coming, Kadim made a decision. He drank the blood of a demon. By doing so, he activated a unique trait known as Blood Buzzer, allowing him to consume demon blood to gain temporary buffs and power boosts. His demeanor shifted immediately. His eyes sharpened, his movements grew savage, and a twisted exhilaration took hold. He entered what the others recognized as his berserk state. But the reason behind his actions was darker than anyone realized. Kadim was not fighting to save the world. He was fighting to leave it. He slaughtered demons relentlessly, devouring them mid-battle, stacking power upon power, pushing himself harder and faster. He wanted everything to end sooner. If this world was truly broken, then he wanted out, even if it meant shaving off a single day from his imprisonment here. He surrendered himself to bloodlust, laughing as he tore through his enemies, driven by a desperate desire to escape. Soon, he stood atop a mountain of mangled demon corpses. Still, it wasn't enough. A succubus-like demon descended onto the pile of bodies, and Kadim's rage found a new focus. He cursed the endless tide of demons, swearing to devour them all, to drink every last drop of their blood. But just as he was about to lose himself completely, a pillar of holy light crashed down from above. The radiance pierced his frenzy. A voice cried out, begging him to stop, calling him back. The world snapped into focus. Before him stood Melissa, gravely wounded. A glowing sigil burned on her chest as she weakly called his name. Blood stained her body, his bloodlust had reached her. As the monstrous transformation receded, Kadim looked down at his own clawed hand, soaked in her blood, and froze in horror. At that moment, the full description of his unique traits surfaced in his mind. The power he wielded came at a terrible cost. The more demon blood he consumed, the more demonic energy eroded his sanity. And now, standing there in the holy light, surrounded by corpses and injured companions, Kadim realized the truth. The power that was helping him escape this world was slowly turning him into something that belonged to it. A horrifying realization strikes him. Kadim begins to question whether it has truly reached the point where he can no longer recognize his own companions. What once felt like harmless game mechanics has transformed into something far more terrifying. The madness is no longer just text on a screen. It is real, invasive, and alive, burrowing into his mind and devouring him from the inside. He struggles against the poison corroding his soul. Demon blood, which once filled him with disgust, now tastes disturbingly sweet. The bloodlust surges constantly, pressing against his thoughts, gnawing away at his sanity. Each moment makes it harder to suppress the berserker rage. Fear takes root. He wonders whether he can endure until the archdemon is defeated, and more frightening still, what he will become if the madness fully consumes him. His spiraling thoughts are interrupted when he looks down and realizes he is carrying Melissa. Despite her injuries, she reassures him, refusing to let him drown in guilt. She reminds him that he has always been the one protecting them, and now it is their turn to protect him. The rest of the party gathers around him, their resolve unshaken. They swear they will not abandon him. Gale declares that Priestess Cyril and Priest Gordon will use every ounce of their power to help him resist the madness. Gordon, ever lighthearted even in grim moments, adds that if necessary, he is fully prepared to knock some sense back into Kadim. Their determination is absolute. With that resolve, Gale calls them forward. He reaches out, reaffirming their bond, declaring that they will defeat the archdemon together and save the world side by side. Kadim accepts, and the strength of their unity steadies him. Their journey continues. The path ahead is brutal, grinding down both body and spirit. Countless battles follow, each one leaving deeper scars, but at last they reach the end. The final battle erupts in absolute chaos. Amid the destruction, a battered Gale cries out as Kadim, fully consumed by berserk fury, launches himself at the archdemon. The clash shakes the world itself. When the dust finally settles, the archdemon collapses, its monstrous form crumbling into dust until nothing remains. Just like that, the ancient terror is gone. Silence follows. The battlefield is left in ruins, empty and still. Melissa stands frozen, staring at the aftermath. Her mind struggles to process what she is seeing. She clutches her book to her chest, unsure how to feel, wondering if this victory is real or merely another illusion. Gordon steps beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. He gently reassures her that by the goddess's grace, it truly seems to be over. Their long, merciless journey has finally ended. Melissa repeats the thought to herself. It's really over. Relief washes over her, heavy and exhausting. Her tense expression softens, then abruptly snaps into shock. Something is wrong, something unexpected has happened. The scene shifts. Two figures wander without direction in a strange, empty space. Cyril suddenly collapses, completely disoriented, unable to comprehend what is happening. Panicked, the blindfolded priestess calls out desperately for Kadim. Nearby, his massive axe lies abandoned on the ground. In the distance, his silhouette is already moving away. Gale shouts after him, demanding he stop, demanding to know where he thinks he is going. Kadim pauses briefly, standing still. Then he turns his head just enough to glance back at them from the corner of his eye. A small, calm smile appears on his face. He offers his farewell, expressing that it was truly an honor to fight alongside them. Then, in a flash of blinding light, he vanishes. Gale lunges forward, reaching desperately, but his hand grasps nothing. The light overwhelms him, forcing him back. Almost immediately, Cyril loses her footing and collapses, crashing to the ground below and going completely still. They are left behind, alone, Elsewhere, Kadim walks through an endless dark void. Nothing around him changes and the emptiness feels unsettling. His thoughts drift to what comes next. An ice-cold beer, then sleep. A lot of sleep. He swears he will never touch a medieval fantasy game again. Still, guilt creeps in. He regrets not saying a proper goodbye to his companions. But reality is reality. What's done is done. It is time to move on. In his mind, he prepares to say farewell to the warrior named Kadim. That life belongs to another world now. A glowing portal appears ahead, radiant and inviting. He is certain this is the exit, the way back to his peaceful, ordinary life. But as he approaches, something feels wrong. His eyes widen, cold sweat breaks across his skin, panic tightens his chest. He desperately hopes this is just a nightmare. Then a cross-shaped light appears. The symbol confirms his fear instantly. That symbol is very bad news. A shaky laugh escapes him, fueled by despair and disbelief. The truth settles in. He isn't going home. The laughter twists into a broken scream, raw with frustration and anguish. Everything he endured, every sacrifice, every drop of blood, it all feels meaningless now. He continues laughing hysterically, unable to stop, as his mind finally cracks under the weight of it all. Then a message appears. New Game Plus. And just like that, everything resets. All effort erased. All suffering undone. The cycle begins again. The scene shifts abruptly. A mounted man clad in heavy armor rides at the front of a long procession, his warhorse moving at a steady pace. Behind him follows a column of soldiers escorting a group of prisoners across barren land. The captives are bound tightly with iron shackles, chains clinking with every forced step they take. Some stumble from exhaustion. Others bleed from the soldiers, relentless strikes meant to keep them moving. Among the prisoners, one man desperately tries to explain himself. He claims he has been wronged, insisting that he was not the one who killed a soldier. According to him, the true culprit was the baker's son. His crime, he says, was nothing more than stealing a bronze ring, and he swears he never knew a silver necklace was hidden alongside it. His pleas fall on deaf ears. A commanding soldier silences him immediately, ordering him to keep his mouth shut. To the soldiers, these prisoners are nothing more than trash. They are not treated as humans, only as burdens to be delivered. Another prisoner speaks up, his voice shaking yet stubborn. He insists that he was framed, claiming that demon byproducts were planted in his bag. He demands to meet the inspector who searched him, believing that the truth would surface if questioned properly. The leading soldier understands, at least privately, that such things do happen. There are men who frame the innocent to inflate their own achievements, and the paladin leading this march is no exception. Even in his youth, that man was known for his hunger for recognition. But a paladin is still a paladin. Questioning one openly is a death sentence. Rather than challenge the paladin, the soldiers turn their suspicion back on the prisoner, asking whether he dares to doubt the judgment of Elga's paladin. They claim that if he is truly innocent, the truth will emerge in time, and that he should return to his place quietly. The prisoner obeys, stepping back into the line. The soldier watching him knows the truth, though. The man will not be saved. Once a paladin has decided someone's fate, survival becomes nearly impossible. Silently, the soldier offers a final thought, wishing the unfortunate soul a better status in his next life. As the march continues, the soldier notices a towering figure among the prisoners. A massive, burly man whose presence alone stands out. He wonders how the paladin even managed to capture such a barbarian in the first place. The scene shifts again. This time, awareness returns slowly to another prisoner. Kadim. He feels wrong. His body does not feel unfamiliar, yet something is missing. The overwhelming power he once possessed is gone. The madness, the bloodlust, the crushing guilt that once consumed his mind have all vanished. Even the scars left by that insanity feel absent. Fragments of memory surface alongside a message he recalls clearly. New game. As a seasoned gamer, he understands what that means. The game has restarted, everything reset back to the beginning. And yet something feels wrong. This is not how the game ever began before. An old man walking beside him suddenly turns and offers him a small medicinal root, suggesting that chewing it during the journey might ease boredom. Kadim studies him cautiously, unsure of the man's intentions. The old man explains himself simply. Long ago, barbarians once helped him, and seeing Kadim reminds him of those lost companions. He admits that this gift is hardly repayment, but it is all he has. He asks how Kadim was captured. Kadim has no answer. His memory of that moment is completely blank. Through the old man's words, the truth becomes clearer. Paladins and priests within imperial territory are openly hostile toward pagans, those who worship gods outside the empire's sanctioned faith. While not officially a crime, such beliefs are treated as one. Then Kadim notices something that unsettles him. Why is there an empire here? This continent should not be under imperial rule. The old man explains that they are heading toward the Luca Empire. Kadim recognizes the name. Luca was once a kingdom located at the center of the continent. Once, the old man clarifies that it was called a kingdom in the past, not anymore. A troubling thought crosses Kadim's mind. This may not simply be the game restarting. This world feels altered. Perhaps this is a parallel version or a different era altogether. The old man continues, explaining that they are being taken to the Empire's capital, the holy city of Luca. Upon arrival, the prisoners will be brought before Elga's judges and subjected to an inquisition. Kadim feels a strange relief, knowing he is not being executed immediately. The old man does not share that sentiment. He explains that inquisitors are obsessed with torture. They treat people like toys, nails driven into gums, molten metal poured onto flesh. Survival is rarely mercy. Before he can finish speaking, everything ends. A spear suddenly pierces straight through the old man's chest. The paladin stands before them, furious. He declares that anyone who insults Elga's authority must wash away their sins with death. The old man collapses, lifeless. The paladin's gaze shifts toward Kadim. He calls him a barbarian, accusing him of causing unrest. He warns that if Kadim wishes to avoid the same fate, he should lower his head and beg forgiveness. Kadim does neither. He remains standing. A faint smirk forms on his lips. The paladin interprets this as mockery. Blasphemy. Without hesitation, the paladin raises his spear and points it directly toward Kadim's eyes, ready to strike. And in that moment, the world holds its breath. But Kadim did not bow. Instead, he smiled. In the midst of despair, he brought his hands together and clapped them shut around the spear mid-thrust. The impact echoed sharply through the air. The paladin froze in disbelief, his eyes widening as he realized that the barbarian had caught the weapon bare-handed. For a moment, the paladin could not comprehend what he was seeing. This was supposed to be a shackled prisoner, a heretic, a barbarian, and yet the strength behind those hands felt monstrous. The paladin demanded that Kadim release the spear, but Kadim answered only with mockery. With a sudden twist of his body, he hurled the paladin forward, sending him crashing across the ground and violently throwing both rider and horse off balance. Dust and debris exploded into the air as the paladin rolled, barely managing to recover before coming to a halt. Driven by faith and rage, he rose again and charged Kadim, declaring that no heretic would be allowed to harm an agent of God. Kadim understood the danger clearly. Even if the paladin lacked true combat experience, he was still empowered by divine authority. This was not a man who would fall easily. The paladin planted his spear firmly into the ground and began calling upon Elga, the so-called master of eternal light. Radiance gathered around him, swelling into a blazing force meant to pass final judgment. With divine energy fully charged, he lunged toward Kadim at full speed, determined to strike him down. Kadim knew instantly that dodging was impossible. The collision was catastrophic. A blinding surge of yellow light swallowed the area, drowning everything in radiance. Kadim's shackles shattered into fragments, blown apart by the force, and his body was hurled backwards several meters, crashing through broken carriages and debris. Even though he managed to block the spear, the divine energy pierced into his chest, tearing through flesh and leaving behind a searing wound. Blood spilled. The paladin stared in disbelief. Despite taking a direct hit from divine judgment, Kadim was still alive. The paladin could not understand it. The barbarian's endurance was as absurd as his physique. Meanwhile, Kadim himself felt the shock of it. His power had been reset. His skills were gone. Only his unique blood-based trait remained. and yet he had struggled far more than expected. Against even a low-level demon, this fight should not have been so difficult. As he lay there struggling to rise, Kadim searched for a way out. That was when he noticed it. A stench. A foul, unmistakable odor seeped from one of the shattered carriages nearby. As the paladin slowly approached, confident that the barbarian was finished, Kadim turned his attention toward the source of the smell. The paladin declared that Kadim's resistance had reached its end, and that forgiveness would be granted only through death. But even he began to wrinkle his nose as the same stench reached him, thick and nauseating. Then Kadim moved. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from the ground, clutching something in his hand. A twisted laugh escaped him, unhinged and wild. The paladin briefly wondered if the barbarian had lost his mind in his final moments. He was wrong. With a wicked grin, Kadim revealed the truth. The god the paladin worshipped so fervently had not chosen him. It had chosen Kadim instead. With a single strike, Kadim smashed his fist into the carriage and tore something free. A demon's severed head. The source of the stench spilled into the open air, thick with corruption and rot. As Kadim held it aloft, something incredible happened. His wounds began to close, flesh knit itself together. Blood ceased flowing as vitality surged back into his body. In that moment, Kadim understood. He finally remembered what he could do. And the battlefield fell silent, as realization dawned on both sides. Now Kadim lifted the monster above his head and began drinking its blood. The paladin was disgusted by this sight, wondering if the barbarian had truly gone insane and was drinking demon blood. Filled with hatred, he considered Kadim too filthy to be allowed anywhere near him. He called out to one of the soldiers and ordered him to finish off the filthy bastard on the spot. However, after drinking the blood, a red and menacing aura surrounded Kadim. The soldier hesitated, sensing danger, but still moved forward, knowing he was walking toward his doom. Kadim grabbed the demon's head with one hand and seized the soldier's head with the other. Even as the soldier screamed for mercy, both were clenched together. The paladin watched in disgust as the soldier's head burst like a balloon filled with red liquid. Kadim realized that the demon he had consumed was low-level, since aside from basic strength enhancement, there were no other special effects. Still, he thought that this would be enough to escape from the damn procession, and indeed it was more than enough. Enraged, with red aura engulfing him from head to toe, everyone witnessed the barbarian gaining insane power. The soldiers screamed, calling Kadim a monster, dropping their weapons and running for their lives. The paladin, however, shouted for them to stop retreating and instead form ranks to subdue the prisoner, claiming that Kadim was unarmed and injured. He declared that anyone who fled would be punished under military law and ordered them to stab Kadim with spears until he died. Before the paladin could finish his command, the demon's head came flying toward him. It narrowly missed his neck, otherwise his head would have been torn clean off. The paladin fell to the ground with shaking legs, wondering where the demon head had come from. Then he saw the real monster charging toward him at terrifying speed with a massive, bulking body. Still, the paladin refused to give up. He called upon Lord Elga once more, using his seal to strike down the servant of Niemann. His eyes turned golden as divine rage consumed him, golden energy enveloping his entire body. Calling out Elga's name, he clashed head-on with Kadim. The paladin believed this was the barbarian's end, thinking Kadim should beg Elga for forgiveness in the afterlife. But what he failed to realize was how badly he had underestimated the barbarian. Kadim mocked him, calling the paladin a rookie and asking if that was all he had. The paladin then realized, in shock, that his sword was being blocked by Kadim's bare arm. While one arm held the blade in place, Kadim's other fist slammed into the paladin's face with such force that it twisted his features grotesquely. It became a one-sided slaughter. Kadim punched again and again, smashing the paladin until his face was completely swollen. With broken teeth and tears streaming down his face, the paladin begged for forgiveness. Kadim noticed this, stood up, turned around, and began to walk away. The paladin thanked Kadim, but deep down he believed the barbarian was foolish and swore that he would take revenge later, praying to Elga for Kadim's death. He planned to strike back when the time was right. Suddenly, he heard the crackling sound of metal piercing the ground. Turning around, he saw Kadim standing there again, holding the paladin's own weapon. This time, Kadim was far more dangerous. Enraged by the paladin's continued prayers to Elga, Kadim tore the staff from his body despite the damage it caused him. He told the paladin that he could remain a loyal dog of his damned god and prey in the afterlife. Calling him a puppy of Elga, Kadim drove the weapon straight through the paladin's chest, ending his life. As Kadim's fury settled, he noticed the remaining soldiers fleeing in terror. Remembering the lesson from his first playthrough, he calmly picked up a spear once again. The soldiers believed they were safe, having run far enough away, but the first one to look back was pierced straight through the head by the spear. One by one, every soldier was killed. Kadim remembered never to leave loose ends. 2 soldiers hid behind bushes in the distance, trembling in fear, thinking they had escaped. Kadim sensed their presence and hurled a spear that pierced both of them at once. As Kadim's red aura finally faded, the remaining prisoners called out to him, praising him for killing the paladin and saying they had something important to discuss. They begged him to break their handcuffs. To everyone's shock, Kadim blew off the head of the elderly prisoner instead. The remaining captives were terrified, not knowing what would happen next. For Kadim, however, this was simply another lesson from his first playthrough: never leave loose ends. Without hesitation, he rushed forward and began slaughtering the prisoners as well. The prisoners backed away in terror. One of them finally asked why he was doing this, what they had done wrong. Kadim grabbed the man with his spear as he begged to be spared. With a cold look, Kadim prepared to strike. When it was over, he stood in silence, surrounded by bodies. He knew that if he let them live, they would surely go around blabbering about what they had witnessed. The paladins would hunt him, and in the worst case, they might be high-ranking ones. That risk was not worth it. We see that one last prisoner hid in the bushes, crying and shaking, wondering if he would be killed too. Kadim found him easily. The man screamed as Kadim approached and calmly said that he was the last one left. He raised his spear. The prisoner cried that it was unfair, begged for mercy, and swore that he had done nothing wrong. Kadim asked him for one good reason to live. The man said that he had a wife and child waiting for him, and that he had been framed under false accusations before being captured. Kadim admitted that the man seemed innocent, but that alone was not enough, and that the man should just die. But at the last second, the man shouted that Kadim might need a guide. That caught Kadim's attention, and he stopped. The prisoner explained that he was a merchant from Maltana in the Freed City Alliance, and since he traveled everywhere, he knew the land better than anyone. Kadim wanted to test whether the man was telling the truth, so he asked him a few questions, including when Luconia became an empire, because in Kadim's memories, it was only a kingdom. He wondered whether, in this timeline, the empire existed from the start, or if it had been created later. Hearing this, the merchant was confused and guessed that perhaps this barbarian came from the wilderness beyond the mountains. Unlike the barbarians who had settled on the continent, if he was from beyond the mountains, then communications might have been cut off for hundreds of years. Eventually, Kadim's patience ran thin. Fearing for his life, the merchant explained that the present year was around 248 in the imperial calendar. More than 200 years had passed since year 1, when the founding emperor established the empire. Before that, it was definitely a kingdom. The boy was confused, wondering what the imperial calendar was, and asked about the time in the lunar calendar. The guide told him that the old calendar was no longer used, and that it might have been more than 1,000 years ago according to the Dalunar calendar. The revelation hit hard. He realized that the calendar commonly used across the continent had become ancient. Kadim questioned him about the Church of Elga and the Demon Realm. The merchant explained that the continent had been unified under the empire around 300 years ago, but now it was practically divided into 3 parts. The church had grown powerful, and no one ever returned from the demon realm, so there was no way to know the real situation. Kadim was shocked. He asked the merchant about several names, wondering if he knew anything about them. The merchant had never heard of them. That shook him deeply. Then the merchant suddenly remembered the name Melissa, wondering if he had heard it somewhere before. For Kadim, it made no sense that the heroes who conquered the demon realm and defeated the archdemon had been completely forgotten. He wondered if this was truly a world connected to the first playthrough. Kadim asked why demons were swarming the continent. The guide explained that no one knew. Some said it was divine punishment, others claimed a mad archmage had opened a door to another world, while some believed it was a sign that a great and terrible evil would soon descend upon the world. But the truth, he said, lay only behind the eyelids of the emperor himself. Kadim stayed silent. He stabbed the spear into the ground and walked past the merchant. He finally understood the truth. He was living 300 years after the first playthrough. His old world was gone, the world he had originally lived in, then been driven out from. He had barely managed to settle in, and the knowledge in his head was already hundreds of years outdated. His comrades had long since turned to dust in this era. He wondered if there was any reason to live through another cycle, and if it was worth it. He questioned whether there was even a guarantee that he could return to reality after reaching the ending again, or whether a new Game++ might begin instead. Overcome with despair, he snapped the spear with his bare hands and pressed the broken tip to his own neck. The merchant begged him to stop. Kadim thought that this might be the best time to end it, hoping there would not be another restart waiting for him. Just as the tip touched his skin, a memory of Melissa and her dreams flashed through his mind. He remembered how Melissa had told him that she wanted to build a tower to teach magic to the mages. He stopped. Grabbing the merchant, he demanded to know about the name Melissa, asking where the man had heard it. The man recalled that the first master of the Tower of Magic had a similar name. Wanting to know its location, Kadim asked where it was. The man explained that the tower was in Vistana, located on the eastern edge of the Free City Alliance. Since they were currently in the central part of the continent, within Imperial territory, even if they left immediately, it would take at least 2 months at the earliest to arrive. But that was enough for the boy. Kadim smiled faintly and said that the man had spoken at the wrong time, just when he wanted to rest in peace. He ordered the merchant to guide him there by the fastest route. When the merchant disagreed, saying that he had a family back home and could not afford to waste such a long time guiding him, Kadim offered him something instead. He said that his payment would be his life. They prepared immediately. Kadim told the merchant to unlock his handcuffs and quickly gather anything he needed. Kadim armed himself with a sword taken from the wreckage, knowing that it would be useful enough. Even if it was not as good as a blessed weapon, when used with his unique trait, he could force it into something decent. Although the paladin's spear was the most desirable item, a blessed weapon sanctified by Elga's priests causes rejection and can be used by anyone other than the paladin himself. Kadim wished that he still had his old axe, the one he used in his first playthrough. Before leaving, the merchant finished preparing and felt relieved that at least his life had been spared. He turned around and noticed what Kadim was doing. The man was collecting demon blood for future use, storing it inside a water pouch. Fully prepared, sword in hand, Kadim knew that they were ready to depart toward the Mage Tower. As the scene shifts, we see many crows gathering over the massacre site. New paladins arrived and discovered the bodies of the previous paladin, Linton. The soldiers realized that everyone had been massacred and wondered what they should do, requesting orders from their superior, Lady Helena. Lady Helena ordered them to search for clues, knowing that they could not return to the Archbishop with nothing more than the report that Linton had been found dead. The soldiers immediately got back to work. Lady Helena wondered who would dare to kill a paladin. She did not know what kind of trash had committed this act, but she decided that whoever it was would pay the price. As the scene shifts, it is night, and the man is lying down while his wounds slowly heal. Kadim had prepared a small campfire and was sleeping near it, while the guide was running away, panting heavily, knowing he had to return and thinking that he needed to run as far away as possible. At first, the man had thought that leaving Imperial territory alone was dangerous, so having a traveling companion was actually a good idea. But the problem with that plan was that the traveling companion was a barbarian surrounded by demon corpses and the remains of dozens of slaughtered people. The man, whose name was Duncan, thought that the boy was a pure barbarian. From what he had observed over the past few days, the barbarian barely responded to anything. Even when the guide asked him to eat something normal or suggested resting longer or making the fire warmer, there was no reaction. Duncan wanted to ask Kadim how he ended up in Imperial territory, but since the boy never spoke, he eventually stayed quiet. He realized that the barbarian barely talked and did not allow questions beyond absolutely necessary ones. No matter how much Duncan observed him, he could not read his intentions at all. Duncan was certain that Kadim was not truly a person, but more like a beast. Every day felt like performing tricks with his head inside a lion's mouth. But even that was not the biggest problem. The real problem was the barbarian's absurd speed. As Duncan ran, Kadim had already caught up. Even though Duncan was a merchant who prided himself on being quick-footed and tireless, whenever he pointed out the direction, the barbarian was already far ahead in no time. When Duncan barely managed to catch up, Kadim would coldly leave a single comment and take off again. Then he would stare at Duncan until he arrived, as if threatening to crush his head if he was late. If Duncan were not the guide, they would already be dozens of kilometers apart. Duncan wondered if Kadim's legs were made of steel, because he was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown. If he kept following the monster at that speed, he truly felt like he was going to die. The man thought that he had to escape somehow. Now we return to the present, where Duncan was running for his life. He thought that the opportunity had come sooner than expected. They had left the forest under the cover of darkness, and he believed the barbarian would not be able to tell which direction he had gone. Even though his bag contained nearly his entire fortune, oil candles, soap, flint, a wool blanket, a silver mirror, and other goods worth enough to set up a street stall in the city, going back to retrieve it might wake the beast sleeping soundly. It was a shame, but nothing was more precious than his life. Duncan ran continuously until he began panting heavily, wondering how far he had gone. Everything looked the same, and he could no longer tell where he was. Still, at this distance, he was sure it would take some time for the barbarian to figure out where he had fled. But the moment Duncan thought he was free, he heard a familiar voice asking where he was going in such a hurry. Kadim was standing there, sword in hand, calmly asking if the man was running away and whether he no longer needed the promised payment. Realizing that escape was impossible, Duncan collapsed to the ground. He told Kadim that he had committed a mortal sin and should never have forgotten the grace of having his life spared. Duncan apologized profusely, begging Kadim to forgive him just this once. But Kadim did not want an apology. He wanted a reason. He knew that if the reason was not addressed, the guide would simply try to run away again. Hearing this, the merchant explained that Kadim's speed was far too fast for him to keep up. If he continued at that pace, Duncan was certain he would collapse and die. Even though Duncan believed he was already facing death, Kadim thought for a moment and then told the man to go back, promising that he would move a bit slower from now on. As Duncan turned back, he wondered if things could really have been this simple from the beginning. The scene shifts back to the camp, where the fire was still burning. Kadim remained awake, while the merchant dreamed restlessly, imagining that he had done something wrong and was being punished for it. Meanwhile, Kadim looked at Duncan and reflected that his fast pace was a habit from the first playthrough. Every moment had felt urgent, as if he were constantly being chased. In the demon realm, everything was barren and hostile. Food and water were never abundant, and rest and leisure were distant concepts. Because he advanced while drinking demon blood, he never knew when madness might consume him. So his comrades would rush over, even saving time by skipping eating and sleeping. Unlike the demon realm, his current surroundings were not that dangerous. Since food and water were sufficient, Kadim thought that maybe he should slow down a bit. Moreover, he now had a reason to slow down because the merchant was quite a useful guide. The man explained everything that needed to be explained, about how multiple borders had constant friction and how travel routes had changed. Kadim decided to trust the guide, telling him that if that was truly the case, then he should proceed that way. Even though Kadim still had a map of the continent in his head, it was a map from over 300 years ago. Without a competent guide, he would not be able to find his way properly. The guide explained that most paladins were capturing pagans on sight. They were obsessed with achievements and desperately exterminating nearby demons. Because of that, a place where a barbarian like Kadim could sleep peacefully would only be after they reached the territory of the Free City Alliance. Kadim looked at his bottle and finally realized that it was because of the paladins that he had not encountered any demons, even though they were said to be swarming across the entire continent. However, he also knew that the blood he had collected earlier would soon become unusable, so he would need to secure fresh blood just in case. The scene shifts to night once again. At last, the guide and Kadim reached a village. However, it looked completely desolated. It resembled a slash-and-burn farming village. The guide believed they should be able to get food and lodging there for the night, but something felt wrong. There were no lights anywhere. Even though it was evening, the gate stood wide open with no guards. The guide wondered if the village had been abandoned. Even Kadim was unsure, knowing that the only way to find out was to go and check. Still, the guide knew it was not safe. A monster or demon might have appeared, forcing everyone to flee. Just then, a mysterious growling sound echoed through the entire village. Hearing it, the guide immediately hid behind Kadim. The boy drew his sword and smiled like a devil, knowing that this was very good news. They had found monsters. As they started moving inside, the guide wondered why there was no one around and what had really happened, because the place did not feel like an abandoned village at all. In fact, it was far too clean to be one. But as the boy reached a gate that was completely dark from the inside, it was as if something awakened within the barbarian. The guide noticed that Kadim had suddenly stopped. The guide realized that this was the only door that remained open. Inside it, something filthy was waiting. In the next instant, it lunged toward the barbarian at insane speed. However, faster than the demon's reflexes was Kadim himself. He instantly drew his sword and beheaded the demon effortlessly, without hesitating for even a second. The upper half of the demon's body fell toward the guide. But that was not the end. Multiple goblins poured out from the same gate. From his first playthrough, Kadim knew that goblins were normally not violent. They were timid creatures that usually ran away from humans. If goblins had turned aggressive, it meant something had interfered with them. Kadim smiled, thinking that he had come to exactly the right place for the time being. One of the fat goblins attacked him and was immediately slashed apart. The other two were stunned by how quickly their companion had been turned into dust. Still, they were not ready to give up. Even as they communicated with one another and tried to counter the human, that human was a monster himself. Kadim cut them down one after another, even as they hurled crude projectiles toward him. A goblin wielding an axe decided to charge Kadim head-on. The boy thrust his sword straight through its stomach, making the creature scream in pain and agony. As if that was not enough, he stabbed it repeatedly until its body turned into green pulp, its limbs dislocated in every possible direction. Seeing this, the guide felt relieved. He wondered if it was finally over. But Kadim was not so sure. Both of them heard a creaking, terrifying sound. Then a grotesque-looking joint goblin appeared, holding a human in one hand. It was a little girl, the goblin's food. When the creature realized it had been discovered, it screamed in a shrill voice. That scream did not last long. Kadim threw his sword, and it slammed straight through the goblin's skull. The creature became lifeless within seconds. The girl dropped to the ground as she was freed from the goblin's grasp. Kadim grabbed the rope binding her and untied it, making sure she was safe. He helped her sit down and immediately prepared to question her, even though she was crying and trembling uncontrollably. He wanted to tell her that as long as she answered, she would not be hurt. Before he could, the guide stepped in. He pulled out several toys and decided to handle the situation himself. He gently explained that they were not bad people and gave the girl some sweets to calm her down. As she finally stopped crying, the guide reassured her that the monsters were gone and that she did not need to worry anymore. It was then that Kadim realized Duncan was good with children. The guide explained that his own child back home was around the same age. Slowly, after eating the sweets, the girl began speaking about her mother. Through sobs, she explained that her parents had abandoned her. Even the toughest barbarian felt his heart tighten at those words. The guide soon realized the truth. The ones who had tied the girl up in the barn were her own parents. Suddenly, a voice called out the girl's name, Lenny. It was a woman's voice. Everyone tensed, wondering if more goblins were nearby. But the woman rushed forward and hugged the girl tightly. She was the girl's mother. She thanked the gods repeatedly that her daughter had been saved. Other villagers who had been hiding in fear slowly came out. They were shocked to see that all the goblins had been eradicated. They wondered if the barbarian had done all this. Kadim picked up the corpse of the giant goblin, drew his sword, and told the villagers that it was not him who had done it, but his sword. Even though he already suspected the truth, he decided to hear it from them anyway. The villagers fell silent. Eventually, the truth came out. The forest had originally been overrun with goblins, and the land where the villagers lived had grown infertile. They burned it down and moved their settlement. When the goblins saw the flames, most of them fled. However, not long ago, the goblins that remained in the forest began attacking the village. They had grown vicious, injuring villagers one after another. When the damage became unbearable, the villagers gathered their able-bodied men and attempted to wipe out the goblins. That was when they encountered something horrifying, a filthy creature that was a mixture of a demon and a goblin. They knew they could not fight it. Unable to withstand the attacks, they fell into despair. The demon did not kill them. Instead, it made a demand. It told them that every week it would come to the village, and from each household it would take the most useless child as a sacrifice. Duncan could not believe it. Children who could barely even speak were being handed over. He demanded to know why they did not give up their grown sons or daughters who were about to be married. The village chief grew angry at him. Duncan suggested abandoning the village altogether, but the villagers refused. Their crops were already sown, and leaving would mean starvation. Hearing this, Kadim slammed his hand on the table in frustration. He asked the chief how many horns the demon had. The chief answered, confused, that the demon had no horns at all. Realizing what they were dealing with, Kadim grabbed his sword and told the chief to lead the way. The villagers were stunned. Then Kadim clarified calmly that they were going to the demon's den, to subjugate it. The villagers lit their torches, the flames carving a trembling path through the forest as night swallowed the road ahead. One by one, they followed the warrior through the darkness. The village leader walked close behind, apologizing again and again, explaining that there was no way they could repay him for his help. Kadim showed no concern for payment. He made it clear that he was doing this for his own reasons and needed no reward. Deeply grateful, the leader addressed him with respect, calling him a mercenary worthy of honor. Before moving on, Kadim picked up an axe from among the supplies, deciding he would need another weapon. Not long after, the group reached the entrance of a cave that felt unnaturally cold and hostile, its darkness seeming to swallow the torchlight. The village leader pointed toward it, explaining that the creature terrorizing them was inside. With the axe now in hand, Kadim quietly prepared himself. Fear quickly took hold of the villagers. The leader announced that they would return to the village and wait, claiming that goblins might attack in their absence. The merchant who had come along stared at them in disbelief, unable to understand how they could turn back after coming this far. Kadim did not argue. He simply stated that cowards would only get in the way and told the merchant to follow him instead. He needed someone to hold the torch while he fought. The merchant stood frozen as the villagers retreated, watching them disappear into the darkness. This was not what he had expected at all. With no other choice, he followed Kadim into the cave. Inside, the silence pressed down heavily. The merchant's hands trembled as he clutched the torch, every sound echoing too loudly in his ears. As they walked deeper, the merchant questioned why Kadim had not condemned the villagers. They had sacrificed their own children without even trying to save them. Kadim glanced at him and asked whether he had ever faced a living demon. The merchant admitted he had not, only having seen mutilated bodies sold on the black market. Kadim explained that fighting a demon broke people. It crushed their will to live, leaving behind only fear and despair. Expecting ordinary villagers to act with reason in such circumstances was unrealistic. Still, the merchant struggled to accept it. Even animals protected their young. Kadim explained that the villagers had made a choice to survive, and that choice could not be judged from the outside. They had no other option. The merchant reflected that from the children's perspective, it was as if the world itself had abandoned them. He wondered what meaning life held if humanity was cast aside so easily. Kadim continued walking in silence. The merchant, unsettled by it, called out to him. Kadim thought to himself that the villagers were more human than he was. After so many battles drenched in blood, his sense of morality had become warped beyond repair. Trying to escape the heavy silence, the merchant asked whether Kadim believed the children were still alive. Kadim slowed slightly, considering every possibility. He finally concluded that if the creature was cruel and cunning, it would have kept them alive. A less sadistic demon would have killed them long ago. The merchant did not understand what he meant. Suddenly, Kadim raised his axe. Panic seized the merchant. For a split second, he believed the warrior was about to kill him. Without hesitation, Kadim hurled the axe forward with tremendous force. It tore through the darkness like a launched spear. The merchant screamed and cowered, unable to comprehend what had just happened. A heavy impact echoed through the cave. Kadim calmly turned and extended a hand toward the trembling merchant. From the shadows ahead, the legs of a green-skinned creature staggered into view. The axe had struck a goblin squarely in the head, embedding itself deep into its skull. The creature groaned weakly before collapsing. Beyond it, more goblins with glowing red eyes watched in silence. Then they charged. An entire group of goblins rushed forward, shrieking in rage. The merchant nearly dropped the torch in terror. Kadim ordered him to keep it steady and not to tremble. With a powerful stomp, Kadim launched himself into the oncoming horde. A mohawked goblin attacked first. Kadim countered instantly, driving his blade straight through the creature's chest. Before it could even collapse, he seized its arm with crushing strength and used its body as a shield against another attack. The goblins screamed in fury at the sight. As the fight continued, Kadim noticed the terrain working against him. Jagged stalagmites restricted his movements, making wide swings difficult. He needed more space. The goblins snarled and regrouped, their rage growing as they prepared to swarm him all at once. And the battle was only beginning. The goblins gathered themselves, snarling and shrieking as they prepared to attack all at once. Faced with the overwhelming numbers, Kadim calmly wrapped a strip of cloth around his hand, tightening it to ensure a firm grip on his weapon. With his sword steady and his stance grounded, he faced the horde head-on. There was no hesitation left in him. He was ready. He surged forward again, his movements swift and precise. The blade cut cleanly through the air and struck its next target straight through the eye. The goblin had no time to react before its body collapsed lifelessly to the ground. From that moment on, Kadim became a blur of motion and blood within the narrow cave. Any goblin that dared step into his reach was cut down without mercy. Blood splattered across the stone floor and stained his body as he turned to face the remaining enemies. The fight was far from over, yet there was no sign of retreat in him. His gaze fell upon the axe still buried in the skull of a fallen goblin. Without effort, he wrenched it free and took hold of it. Now armed with both sword and axe, Kadim threw himself back into the swarm. The cave echoed with wet impacts and snapping bone as the battle descended into a full slaughter. Goblins fell one after another, unable to mount any meaningful resistance. One creature's head was cleaved cleanly from its body, spinning through the air before striking the ground with a dull, final thud. Behind him, the merchant turned deathly pale, his stomach churning at the sight. He could barely comprehend that a single man had done all of this alone. Bodies littered the cave floor, blood pooling between broken weapons and shattered limbs. Overwhelmed by terror, the surviving goblins broke ranks and fled, screaming as they rushed deeper into the cave. The merchant shouted a warning, pointing at their retreating forms. Kadim showed no concern. He simply stated that they would follow, as the fleeing goblins would lead them directly to the demon. Together they pressed onward into the depths of the cave. The torchlight danced across jagged walls as the tunnel gradually widened into a vast open chamber. The merchant noted that the stone appeared carved and shaped, wondering aloud if this was the goblin's base. Kadim ignored the observation. Instead, he slowed and inhaled deeply, his expression tightening. He had sensed something wrong. There was a demon nearby. Panic surged through the merchant, but Kadim ordered him to stay back and not attempt to flee. Running would only make him prey. The goblins would hunt him down without mercy. If necessary, he was told to use the torch to defend himself. Kadim's focus sharpened as he advanced alone. His movements became impossibly fast, almost silent. Then, without warning, a red blur burst from the darkness. Claws tore through the air and struck him down, sending him crashing to the ground. The merchant screamed in horror. The red demon loomed over Kadim, studying him with glowing eyes. It had never seen a human like this before. This was no mere villager. A twisted smile spread across its face as it found the encounter amusing, even exciting. Kadim struggled to rise, blood seeping from his wounds. The situation was far worse than he had been led to believe. As he stared at the creature, he noticed something unsettling. Its horns were still small, but they were growing. At this realization, Kadim felt irritation rise within him. The demon stared back with pure malice, its expression twisted with satisfaction. The meaning of those horns was clear. The creature was evolving, crossing the boundary from a low-level demon into an intermediate one. It relished the brief hesitation it sensed from the warrior. Without warning, the demon charged at full speed. Kadim braced himself and crossed his weapons just in time, barely blocking the impact. The force sent a violent shock through his arms. He knew immediately that this strength did not belong to a weak demon. The block had been instinct alone, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. The creature's rage grew. Too many goblins had died, and its hatred toward humans had sharpened. Kadim understood the danger clearly. A mid-level demon was on an entirely different scale. The demon toyed with him, offering survival through humiliation, demanding obedience through cruelty. Kadim noticed the horns again. They were still incomplete. The demon grew impatient at his silence. In response, Kadam drove his sword into the stone floor unimpressed. He reached for his canteen without hesitation. He did not take orders from something that bled. With a sharp motion, he tore it open. The scent of demon blood filled the air. The creature froze. Shock rippled through its twisted face as it watched a human drink something that should have driven him insane. The canteen fell empty to the ground, echoing dully against the stone. In the next moment, a violent red aura exploded around Kadam's body. Pain tore through him as the blood's power surged into every vein, screaming through his muscles and bones. The demon did not understand what it was seeing. Kadam's eyes burned crimson. The blood was old, diluted by time, yet it was enough. He knew he had to end this quickly. For the first time, the demon felt something unfamiliar. Fear. It rejected the feeling instantly and lunged again, claws poised to tear him apart. But Kadam could now see everything, every shift of muscle, every twitch of intent. The demon's judgment was clouded by its half-grown horns, its power rushing ahead of its control. Kadam countered. The axe crashed into the demon with devastating force. A scream tore from the creature as shock and pain ripped through its body. Kadam glanced at the weapon and saw cracks spreading along the blade. He abandoned it immediately, gripping his sword instead. Even if every weapon shattered, he would continue with his bare hands. The demon reeled, disbelief etched into its expression. Hatred consumed it. This was impossible. A human should not possess this kind of power. Kadam stepped forward. He spun, his sword carving a brutal horizontal arc. The blade collided with claws, tearing flesh and sending the demon flying backward. Before it could recover, Kadam closed the distance again. The axe struck next, splitting into the creature's body and driving it back even further. He did not relent. The demon screamed as blow after blow crushed into it. It tried to retaliate, but Kadam seized its claws and drove a fist into its chest. The impact sent the demon hurtling across the chamber, its scream echoing through the cave. Kadam advanced, sword raised. The creature saw the blade coming and panicked. It tried to retreat, but Kadam spun his body and unleashed everything he had left. The force of the strike shattered the stone beneath them, sending shockwaves through the cavern. The demon collapsed, broken and barely conscious. As it lay there, terror overtook rage. Whatever stood before it was no longer human. That conclusion settled in its mind with absolute certainty. This was a monster wearing human skin. Kadam said nothing. With a single motion, he hurled the demon across the cave. It slammed into the wall with a heavy, lifeless thud. The creature realized then that a frontal assault was useless. Panic overtook strategy. Its attention snapped toward the rear of the cave. The goblins had surrounded the merchant. The man waved the torch desperately, shouting threats he could not back up. Firelight flickered wildly across the walls, casting frantic shadows. The demon saw its chance. If the fire was extinguished, victory might still be possible. Kadam noticed instantly. His sword remained embedded in the shattered floor, but his axe lay within reach. As the demon leapt toward the merchant, Kadam grabbed the weapon and took aim. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The creature's intent was obvious. Kadam would not allow it to succeed. With a focused gaze and a steady hand, he prepared to throw. The demon leapt toward the merchant, its body slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Kadam was already moving. He knew the creature was fast enough to dodge a direct throw. Instead of aiming for the demon itself, he adjusted his grip on the axe and made a different choice. With all his strength, he hurled the weapon straight into the cave floor beneath the demon's path. The creature realized the intent too late. The axe struck stone and detonated the ground in a violent explosion of shattered rock. The blast tore through the cave, sending debris and dust flying in every direction. The goblins froze in confusion, and the merchant staggered back in shock as the ground roared beneath them. The demon was caught midair. The shockwave threw it violently backward, its body spinning out of control as dust flooded its eyes. Blinded and disoriented, the creature screamed in rage, losing all sense of balance. Kadam did not hesitate. He drove his foot into the ground and surged forward in a single, explosive motion. Before the demon could recover, the sword pierced straight through its face. A scream of pure agony echoed through the cave as the blade embedded itself deep into the creature's skull. The demon was still alive. That alone surprised him. Kadam tightened his grip. The creature's resistance had become nothing more than an annoyance. With a sharp twist, he wrenched the blade, and the demon screamed desperately as the sword tore upward. In the next instant, Kadam finished it, splitting its head cleanly in half. The body collapsed into the dust with a heavy, lifeless thud. The red aura surrounding Kadam faded. He exhaled slowly as the power drained from his body, realizing just how close he had come to facing the demon without that borrowed strength. Relief washed over him, brief but real. Then he heard it. Voices. The remaining goblins had dropped to their knees, trembling and crying out, calling him their king. Their ferocity had vanished the moment the demon died. Even so, Kadam did not lower his guard. His grip on the sword tightened. In the next heartbeat, he moved. One goblin's head left its shoulders in a clean, merciless strike. Another fell seconds later, pierced through the chest before it could even scream. Panic spread through the survivors as Kadam advanced, cutting them down without hesitation. He noticed one goblin fleeing and another clutching the merchant's torch. Then everything changed. The last goblin seized the merchant, pressing a blade to his neck. The torch shook violently as the creature trembled, using the man as a shield. The merchant froze, terror locking his body in place. Kadam stopped. His expression did not change. He watched the scene with cold focus, weighing the distance, the angle, the creature's fear. The demon blood's influence had fully faded now, leaving only clarity behind. The merchant's voice shook as he tried to steady himself, apologizing, barely able to breathe. Kadam understood immediately. The children were deeper inside the cave. Without rushing, without panic, he acted. The final goblins did not last long. When it was over, Kadam and the merchant moved deeper into the darkness, dragging the demon's corpse behind them. The torchlight carved a narrow path forward as they searched until they found the children. Alive. Back in the village, cries of disbelief turned into sobs of relief as the children returned. Parents ran forward, clutching them tightly, collapsing in tears. Gratitude poured out toward the warrior who had brought them back. The merchant flinched every time the demon's body shifted on Kadam's shoulder. An elderly woman offered him stew in thanks, but Kadam refused. He told her to give the food to the children instead. They had endured fear, hunger, and darkness for too long. He told the merchant to eat. Then, without ceremony, Kadam turned and walked away. His body was heavy with exhaustion, his steps slow but steady. Behind him, the village celebrated, yet one child stood apart, staring blankly into the distance. The cave had let him go, but it had not released him. The merchant became quiet as he watched the boy standing apart from the celebrating villagers. The child's empty stare was unsettling. Something about that expression stirred a memory, and suddenly the merchant felt a wave of panic. Inside the cave, he had seen the children huddled together in the darkness. He remembered their shaking bodies and the words that had echoed endlessly around them. They had been crying, begging, asking why their parents had abandoned them, pleading not to be left behind. Kadam explained that the children had been mentally broken inside the cave. They had not simply been imprisoned, they had been systematically crushed. The demon had whispered to them again and again that their parents had willingly abandoned them. It told them they were useless, unwanted, and disposable, that no one would ever come for them. The repetition had been relentless, deliberate, and cruel. The merchant was horrified. Kadam explained that calling it brainwashing was almost inaccurate. The demon had not created lies. It had simply taken a painful truth and carved it deeper into their minds until it became absolute. The psychological damage was so severe that even a trained priest might not withstand it. The merchant felt despair settle into his chest. He wondered aloud whether the children would ever truly recover. Kadam explained that demons fed on suffering. Human despair was their greatest source of power. Prolonged emotional torment nourished them far more than a quick death ever could. In that moment, the merchant understood why a less cruel demon would have simply killed the children. Death would have been faster. What they endured was far worse. He then wondered whether the parents' remorse could heal the damage, whether sincerity, guilt, and love could undo what had been done. Kadam did not say it was impossible, but he doubted it. Parents who abandoned their children once, he explained, were capable of doing it again. Trust, once broken at that level, rarely healed cleanly. The merchant had no response. The future felt unbearably grim. Without asking any more questions, the merchant chose to follow Kadim. The two of them left the village quietly, moving away from the noise and relief behind them. The traumatized boy watched their figures disappear into the distance. Moments later, the merchant ran after Kadim, asking why they were leaving so soon. He suggested resting, even briefly. Kadim explained that it was no longer safe. Witnesses would already be spreading word. Killing a paladin was a crime that could never be ignored. The Empire would not overlook it. Trackers would be dispatched, and once they were on the trail, escape would become nearly impossible. The merchant finally remembered the truth in full. Kadim had killed a paladin of Elga. Kadim warned that they needed to move immediately. Far away, unseen by them, Knight Helena observed the aftermath from a distance. Her expression was calm, focused, and unwavering. She had seen everything, and she had already made her decision. Back in the village, Kadim tightened his grip around the demon's severed head. With a sharp twist of his wrist, he crushed part of the skull and began extracting what he needed. Thick, dark blood flowed out as he carefully filled his canteen. Once it reached halfway, he stopped. That much was enough. His purpose there was already fulfilled. He crushed what remained of the demon's head into the dirt until it was unrecognizable. The village leader cautiously approached and asked what should be done with the demon's body. Kadim showed no interest in it and instructed them to burn everything without exception. The villagers were stunned. To them, a demon's corpse was an unimaginable fortune. Demon remains could be sold for enormous sums, especially to paladins of the Alliance. The leader assumed the warrior had come for money and hesitated, thinking of how valuable the body could be. Kadim immediately shut down the idea. He explained that if the body was not burned, the stench would spread. That scent would draw monsters from far away. Goblins, demons, and worse would follow it straight to the village. He stared them down and asked if they wanted another attack, this time from something far more violent. Fear washed over the leader's face. He stammered an apology and quickly ordered the villagers to burn everything at once. As Kadim prepared to leave, one of the villagers called out. The people had gathered a few items as thanks and asked him to accept them. Kadim glanced over the offerings and nodded, saying he would make use of them. Among the items was a belt, which he immediately put on. The quality was decent enough. He told them to leave the area as soon as possible. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his chest. The merchant noticed immediately, confused, but Kadim understood. It was the wound left by the paladin's spear. His body had already recovered from the brutal fight in the cave, yet this injury had not healed even after days. That told him everything he needed to know. The spear had been consecrated. It was not a normal weapon. The scene shifted to the site where the paladin had fallen, his weapon still lying abandoned on the ground. A female knight arrived to investigate. Her name was Helia. She surveyed the area calmly while her subordinate reported that no clues remained. Prisoners were dead, nothing had been stolen, and there were no signs of rescue. She dismissed his conclusion immediately, calling it pathetic. She pointed out that the lack of theft meant the culprit never intended to rescue anyone. When the knight suggested the involvement of an unholy group, Helia snapped at him for failing to understand the situation. This was why he had never advanced in rank. The man swallowed his frustration. Helia was not someone he could argue with. She was an arch-paladin, famous for defeating 20 demons on her own. The youngest to ever reach that rank in the Empire. Her temperament was terrible, but her strength was unquestionable. With no other options left, he followed her orders. Helia demanded the holy relic the Archbishop had entrusted to them. The knight froze. That relic was Damien's twin mirror, a sacred artifact capable of revealing the past and future. One of its mirrors had shattered less than 10 years ago after reflecting something far too powerful. Helia grew furious and reminded him that relics existed for moments like this. The victim, after all, had been the Archbishop's nephew. Reluctantly, the knight handed it over. Helia knelt on the grass and activated the relic. The mirror began to glow intensely. A surge of violet energy shot into the sky, and an image formed within the mirror's surface. It showed a barbarian standing amid carnage, drinking demon blood as battle raged around him. The vision shifted to the paladin screaming for retreat, while Helia herself watched in shock. The barbarian's eyes glowed a furious red. Then the mirror cracked. In the next instant, It shattered into countless fragments. Both paladins stood frozen. That was impossible. The twin mirror only shattered when it reflected the presence of an archdemon. Terror crept into the knight's voice as he suggested retreating to report what they had witnessed. Helia smiled. There was no reason to turn back now. The culprit had revealed himself. She tightened her grip on the hilt of her sword. Power surged around her body as her aura flared to life. Her resolve was absolute. She would hunt him down herself. With cold hatred burning in her eyes, Helia swore she would personally execute that monster wearing human skin. The scene shifted once more. Night had fallen. By a quiet riverbank, the merchant sat alone, staring into the flowing water. His expression was troubled, weighed down by everything he had seen. The merchant could not stop thinking about the village children. Their hollow eyes and silent fear clung to his mind, no matter how hard he tried to shake it off. Before he realized it, the image of his own 8-year-old son surfaced in his thoughts. The resemblance struck him painfully. He shook his head, forcing the memories away. If he let his emotions overwhelm him now, he would not survive the road ahead. Steadying himself, he grabbed his water canteen and made a decision. Staying close to the barbarian was his only chance. If he wanted to return home alive, he had no other choice. A short while later, he returned to the camp. The fire had already burned out, leaving behind faint embers and drifting smoke. Kadim lay on the ground nearby, unmoving. The merchant apologized for being late, mentioning that dinner would be ready soon, but the sight before him felt strange. The warrior was already lying down, far too still. Something felt wrong. As the merchant stepped closer, he noticed beads of sweat covering Kadim's body. His breathing was shallow. Pain was etched across his face. Panic surged. He could not understand how someone capable of tearing demons apart could be reduced to this state. His eyes fell to the warrior's chest, and his heart sank. The wound from the paladin's spear had reopened. It looked far worse than before, darkened and raw, as if it were rotting from the inside. Only then did Kadim realize what he should have understood much earlier. The paladin's weapon had been consecrated. It was blessed specifically to deal fatal damage to demons. Under normal circumstances, such a blessing would not affect an ordinary human. But Kadim was no ordinary man. His power came from demon blood. That alone made him vulnerable. The blessing did not see him as human anymore. Rest would never heal this wound. The merchant suggested they should have stayed in the village longer, but Kadim already knew the truth. Time would only make it worse. Instead, he asked a strange question, one that confused the merchant. He asked about the moon. The merchant thought back and answered that the previous night had been a waxing crescent. Relief washed over Kadim's face. He had not missed it. If tonight was the night, then there was still a chance. A narrow one, but a chance nonetheless. Before either of them could think further, a sudden sound tore through the forest. Branches snapped, leaves rustled violently. Both men froze. The merchant turned pale as low, echoing howls rolled through the trees. One after another, glowing eyes began to appear in the darkness, surrounding the camp from all directions. A massive paw slammed into the earth. From the shadows emerged a towering wolf, its fur bristling, its claws long and sharp, its fangs bared in fury. More shapes followed behind it, forming a pack. Blade wolves! The merchant screamed in terror the moment he recognized them. Kadim, however, only stared ahead, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. He let out a slow breath and forced himself upright. Despite the pain ripping through his chest, he reached for his axe and sword. This world truly refused to leave him in peace. He told the merchant to stay back. The man hesitated, worried about the warrior's condition, but Kadim was already stepping forward. Annoyance flickered across his face as he tightened his grip on his weapons. The wolves snarled, muscles tensing, ready to tear them apart. Kadim glared back at them, unflinching. They had chosen the worst possible time to show up. And despite everything, he was still standing. The wolf pack surged forward all at once, moving with ruthless coordination as they charged toward the wounded warrior. Even with his vision blurring and pain tearing through his body, Kadim forced himself to steady his stance. The beasts closed in fast, their movements sharp and precise, driven purely by hunger and instinct. One of the wolves leapt first, claws outstretched, aiming to tear him apart. Kadim reacted on instinct. His axe swung upward in a brutal arc, crashing into the creature's skull with terrifying force. The impact sent the wolf flying through the air, its body slamming into the darkness beyond the camp. The rest of the pack hesitated for a split second, startled by the sheer violence of the blow. Kadam realized his aim was unstable. His vision was shaking badly. Before he could adjust, two more wolves attacked together. He raised his sword, trying to strike one down, but the second lunged from the side, tearing into him without mercy. Pain flared as he staggered, and in the next moment the remaining wolves closed in, surrounding him completely. With no room left to retreat, Kadam abandoned restraint. He slammed a fist into the face of the nearest wolf, the impact cracking bone. Grabbing the creature mid-snarl, he lifted it with raw strength and hurled it straight into another charging beast. The collision was savage. Bones shattered as the two bodies smashed together and collapsed in a heap. His patience was wearing thin. Another wolf lunged, and Kadam seized it, using its body as a shield as claws raked uselessly against flesh and fur. With a furious motion, he smashed the trapped wolf into its packmate, crushing them both without hesitation. He tossed the broken body aside and turned toward the remaining enemies, blood dripping from his hands. Even wounded, several wolves already lay dead. But the fight was not over. The surviving beasts regrouped quickly, circling him with low growls. Kadam recognized the behavior immediately. These were experienced hunters. They were adapting, and his body was reaching its limit. He turned sharply and shouted for the merchant to stay back. Desperate to help, the merchant grabbed a torch and waved it wildly, trying to drive the beasts away. The wolves hesitated but did not retreat. Kadam knew the truth then. If this continued, they would all die. The demon blood burned inside his chest like poison. In his current state, drinking it again would worsen his wounds and erode what little stability he had left. But there was no other option. Without hesitation, he raised the canteen and drank. The empty container slipped from his hand and struck the ground with a hollow sound. Instantly, a violent red aura erupted around his body. The air itself seemed to recoil. The wolves froze, their instincts screaming danger. They stepped back, snarling uneasily as something monstrous awakened before them. Kadam's eyes ignited with a terrifying crimson glow. The demon blood surged through his veins. In a blur of motion, he charged and cleaved a wolf clean in half. The speed of the strike was absurd, far beyond what should have been possible. Blood sprayed across the camp as the body collapsed without even understanding what had happened. Behind him, the merchant struggled to defend himself with the torch as wolves closed in once more. Two beasts leapt simultaneously, fangs bared, leaving him no chance to escape. He screamed, certain of his death. But Kadam appeared like a red shadow. Both wolves were cut down midair, their bodies crashing lifelessly at the merchant's feet. He had been saved at the very last second. From that moment on, the battle became a slaughter. The warrior moved with relentless fury, giving the wolves no time to react. Kadam realized the effect of the Berserker state had changed again. The demon blood he consumed this time carried a different nature. Agility. His speed increased to an unnatural level. Each movement was sharper, faster, deadlier. He remembered the red demon from earlier, its terrifying swiftness, and understood immediately. This was its blood. The remaining wolves panicked. Some turned and fled, but Kadam did not mistake it for retreat. They were repositioning, waiting. The red aura around him flared violently, then began to thin. And then the ground shook. A massive paw slammed into the camp, sending dirt and ash flying. The merchant stumbled back as a new presence emerged from the darkness. A giant wolf stepped forward. Its body was scarred and enormous, easily twice the size of the others. Its eyes burned with intelligence and hatred as it locked onto Kadam. The merchant warned him instinctively, sensing the overwhelming threat. Kadam understood immediately. This was the pack leader. Worse still, the demon blood was fatting. The red glow around him dimmed with every breath. His borrowed power was running out. The alpha wolf charged. Kadam raised his weapons and braced himself as the beast slammed into him with crushing force. The impact sent shockwaves through his body, and for a moment, he wondered if this was the strength meant to break him completely. The battle had reached its most dangerous point, and Kadam stood at its center, wounded, exhausted, and still refusing to fall. The creature's strength far exceeded Kadim's expectations. As he strained to hold his ground, a sharp, tearing pain ripped through his body. The pressure became unbearable. His breath caught in his throat, and he coughed violently as his strength finally gave out. In that instant, the red aura surrounding him shattered like mist, and the impact sent him flying backward across the camp. The merchant screamed in panic, calling out to him in desperation, begging him to wake up as the massive wolf closed in. Kadim felt a burning pain in his chest as the old wound from the paladin's spear split open once more, blood soaking through his clothes. The giant wolf snarled, its presence crushing and merciless, while the merchant rushed forward in a futile attempt to help. Lying on the ground, Kadim slowly lifted his gaze to the sky. He ignored the danger closing in and focused instead on the heavens above. Something felt right. The timing was perfect. The merchant, frozen in fear, could not understand the calm settling over the warrior in the face of death. Kadim's eyes widened slightly. The moment had arrived. Above him, the sky was empty. Midnight had come and the moon was nowhere to be seen. A moonless night. With renewed resolve, Kadim forced himself upright and drove his sword into the ground with all the strength he had left. The earth trembled beneath the blade. Drawing deep within himself, he called upon Athala, the undefeated master of all weapons, offering neither plea nor surrender, only a demand born of blood and survival. He asked for blessing. He asked for strength. He asked for his thirst to be quenched by the blood of his enemies. The merchant stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was unfolding before his eyes. Kadim declared that with the moon gone from the sky, he would discard his own name upon the blade. The moment the words left him, golden light erupted outward in a violent explosion. The ground shook as a blazing aura engulfed his body. The giant wolf recoiled, instinct screaming danger, its massive form stepping back in fear. The merchant screamed, overwhelmed, watching as Kadim was swallowed by a towering pillar of golden fire. From within the radiance, a presence stirred. A mysterious force asked what name the warrior would grant to the blade, reborn in his hands. In that instant, Kadim remembered the resonance he once felt in another life. The familiar pulse of power echoed through his arms and into his heart. The sword vibrated violently, responding to his will, to his sacrifice. With glowing eyes and unwavering resolve, Kadim chose the name. Massacre. The golden aura detonated outward with overwhelming force. Every ounce of power he possessed poured into the weapon he gripped. The blade blazed brighter than the fire itself, its edge humming with deadly intent. A crimson symbol appeared along the sword's surface, shaped unmistakably like a mosquito. It marked the blade as something no longer ordinary, a vessel of hunger and destruction. The weapon had accepted its name. Kadim smiled faintly as the transformation completed. By discarding his own name to empower the blade, a hidden and forbidden trait awakened within him. From this moment on, the sword would drink in his place. Witnessing the bizarre transformation, the merchant screamed in terror, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Before the fear could fully settle in his mind, Kadim tore the sword free from the ground in a single swift motion. The ritual was complete. Whatever had been awakened was now bound to him. Without hesitation, he surged forward, charging straight at the giant wolf with overwhelming force. The creature barely had time to react. Its instincts screamed danger as it snarled and braced itself, but the battle had already restarted. As Kadim swung, a strange phenomenon occurred. A dark, ore-like aura wrapped around the blade, spreading across its surface like living shadow. The weapon's special effect activated. With each strike, it began to drain the life from its target. The moment the blade cut into flesh, warmth surged back into Kadim's body. His breathing steadied. His wounds closed. Strength flowed through his limbs once more. For the first time since the paladin's strike, he felt truly alive again. The giant wolf recoiled, yellow eyes burning with rage as blood sprayed across the ground. Kadim pressed the attack, striking again without mercy. The blade glowed with deep crimson and black light as it carved into the creature's skull. Blood streamed down the weapon's edge, and with every drop stolen, his body healed further. Even the cursed wound left behind by the consecrated spear vanished. Kadim froze for a brief moment, stunned by the result. This power far exceeded his expectations. Standing amid the fallen wolves, he realized the timing had been almost merciful. The pack had arrived at the perfect moment, offering him the blood he needed to survive. He studied the blade in his hand, understanding its nature. The effect was simple yet terrifying. Life steal. Damage dealt was converted into vitality, though the efficiency remained low due to the weapon's early stage. Against enemies without blood, the effect would be useless. Still, it was enough. More than enough for now. He exhaled slowly, deciding not to push his luck. Greed at the beginning only led to disaster. That was a lesson burned into him from a past life. The true advantage lay in something else entirely, the ability to engrave special effects onto weapons without rare materials. And this was only the beginning. From behind a tree, the merchant finally emerged, trembling. He stared at the bodies littering the ground, disbelief etched across his face. The warrior had one while standing on the edge of death. As he drew closer, his shock deepened. Every wound was gone. Not only the bites, but even the grievous injury from the paladin's weapon had vanished without a trace. Kadim watched him carefully, and then posed a question that caught the man completely off guard. He asked why the merchant had not tried to run away. The man froze, unable to answer. He had never even considered fleeing. Kadim calmly noted that if he had chosen to run, he would never have been caught. The statement stunned the merchant. He struggled to process it, scratching his chin as realization slowly dawned. Then it struck him all at once. Even if he had fled, the wolves would have hunted him down. Escape had never truly been an option. Yet he denied that explanation to himself. He hadn't run because he was worried about the wounded barbarian left behind. Kadim, clearly exhausted, ended the moment there. He announced that he needed to sleep. The merchant was ordered to keep watch through the night, but Kadim left him with a chilling warning. If the man ran, he should run to the very edge of the world. If Kadim ever caught him again, there would be no mercy. The merchant did not doubt the threat for even a second. Terrified, he obeyed. He spent the entire night awake by the dying campfire, watching the darkness and listening for danger. When dawn finally came, the merchant looked utterly drained. He explained that they had 10 days of travel ahead. To avoid the Empire's patrols, they would head south. Kadim agreed immediately. Another encounter with paladins was the last thing he wanted. The merchant added that the route was safer but came with its own risks. Bandits often roamed those roads. Still, he admitted that against someone like Kadim, bandits would pose little trouble. He pointed to a location on his map, a castle town called Morton. The roads were stable, and it would be a good place to resupply. From there, a shortcut known as the Golden Road would lead them straight to Vistana. Kadim studied the path in silence. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was still better than before. He remembered how different things had been centuries ago. The eastern continent had once been nothing but a battlefield. Kingdoms clashed endlessly, cities shut their gates to outsiders, and survival was a daily struggle. For someone like him, a towering barbarian, those days had been even harsher. Wherever he went, people had looked at him with fear and suspicion. This time, however, the path ahead felt different. He remembered a girl who had once looked at him as if he were nothing more than an insect. She had been a mage, a scholar by trade, always hiding behind books and cold logic. Her name was Melissa. Back then, she had openly taken notes about him, describing him as an ogre rather than a man, even suspecting that he might be a criminal involved in human trafficking. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, useless and distant, yet it drew a faint smile from him. It reminded him how far back his past truly stretched. The merchant noticed his expression and tried to reassure him, explaining that the alliance had changed. People there were more open now, less obsessed with appearances. They cared about deeds rather than looks. He insisted that this was the truth. Still, the warrior did not seem convinced. His face remained serious, guarded by years of distrust earned through experience. As they continued along the road, a strange scene unfolded ahead of them. A group of men stood in the middle of the path, arguing loudly and blocking the way forward. Kadim slowed his steps and observed them carefully, then glanced at the merchant, silently asking for his thoughts. The merchant studied the scene and concluded that part of the group looked like bandits, but the others felt different. Their behavior did not quite match. He admitted he could not tell what was really going on. Kadim decided it would be better to avoid the situation entirely. Trouble had a way of clinging to him, and he had no intention of inviting more of it. He began to turn away, planning to take a detour. That plan failed instantly. One of the hooded men noticed them. Without hesitation, the man pointed in their direction and shouted, calling them over. The road suddenly felt much narrower than before. Kadim felt irritation rise in his chest. This was exactly the kind of nuisance he had wanted to avoid. With no real choice left, he stepped forward, his hand settling naturally on his weapons. His posture shifted, ready for whatever might follow. As he approached, the men stiffened, startled by his towering presence. He said nothing, simply staring at them with a heavy, intimidating gaze. Then one of the men suddenly reacted. His eye glowed with a strange, golden light, and he clapped his hands together as if celebrating the arrival of something long awaited. The tension broke in an unexpected way. The group moved toward Kadim eagerly, speaking with confidence, as if this outcome had been guaranteed from the start. At the same time, the bandits on the other side seized the opportunity. They fled without looking back, scattering like frightened animals. One of the men laughed openly as he watched them run, mocking them as rats and claiming that he had known the boss would show up. Kadim's annoyance deepened. He demanded to know what they were doing, his patience thinning. The man responded with exaggerated gratitude, thanking him for coming to help and calling him the Raging Horn of Ian. The title caught Kadim off guard. He let out a tired sigh and made it clear that they were mistaken. He was not who they thought he was. He told them he had a long journey ahead and ordered them to clear the road. The men froze, disbelief spreading across their faces. They questioned him, unable to accept that he was not the figure they had been waiting for. Confusion settled over the group and silence followed. Then the mood shifted. One of the men drew his dagger, frustration boiling over. He demanded to know who Kadim really was, his voice thick with anger. To him, Kadim was nothing but a nobody who had appeared out of nowhere, stirring confusion and ruining their expectations. The merchant stiffened at the sudden hostility, fear flashing across his face. Kadim, however, remained completely unfazed.